Welcome to Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert. I'm a lifelong horse person and professional equine nutritionist with the goal of helping horses and their humans create balanced diets to set them up for success, no matter what age, discipline, or circumstance. Disclaimer, the information discussed here is based on current scientific research and is for educational purposes only. Every horse's individual needs vary. This is not a substitute for veterinary medicine or nutrition consultation. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Farm to Stable, an equine nutrition podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Nettie Liebert. And this week, I want to talk a little bit about weight gain in horses. And we talked a lot on this podcast about managing weight, keeping weight off a horse, what to do if your horse needs to lose weight. But we haven't talked too much about the horse that needs to gain weight. And they are out there, especially this time of year. It is spring in North America. And a lot of times, people are not necessarily riding so much in the colder months. And then when it starts to get a little warmer, you pull the blankets off, you go to brush your horse, you notice, oh, geez, maybe he's lost a little more weight over the winter than I had anticipated. Or perhaps there could be a number of other reasons why a horse has lost weight. If there has been even an injury, or maybe they've lost condition, it could have to do with genetics, stress, change in environment. There are lots of things that contribute to dietary requirements, right? And season and age are just a few more to add to the list. So I want to talk about what to do if you think your horse needs to gain weight. And this could apply to seniors, healthy horses, and whatever. I know metabolic horses are a special case, and I won't forget about them. But let's start in general. So how do you know if your horse is underweight? To some people, it might be fairly obvious. To others or new horse owners, it may not be. So body condition scoring is very important. We've talked about that a lot here, and I'll put a link to a really good body condition score chart from Texas A&M University, where body condition scoring was developed. If you are standing a few feet from your horse, looking at him from a side profile, if you can see ribs, chances are he might be a little too thin. And if you can see, protruding hips or things like that. So sometimes it's a little more obvious than others. If that horse has a full winter coat, that winter coat may actually cover up some of that weight loss. So you want to make sure that you become familiar with body condition scoring and putting your hands on the horse. So you should be able, for example, to feel those ribs pretty easily, but you don't necessarily want to see them. Now, there are exceptions. And for example, race horses, they like horses to be what's called race fit, which is maybe a body condition score of about a 4, where you would see those ribs. So discipline does play into this. But for the average horse owner, that's probably not the case. So where do you begin? Well, a lot of times, and this is one of the most common questions as an equine nutritionist that I get asked, my horse is too thin, my horse is too fat. So too thin is one of them. A lot of times it comes down to just understanding what your horse needs to eat in a day. And sometimes it's a very simple solution. Sometimes it's more complicated if there's a health issue involved. But let's start with the easy part. So let's say your horse is a little bit underweight for whatever the reason. And it's time to get that horse to gain a little bit of weight, to be in proper condition. And remember, an underweight horse could have problems with performance, their immune system could potentially be compromised. There could be heat or cold intolerance. So a number of things that go along with being underweight, aside from just being underweight. You also want to make sure they're not being malnourished. So start with the basics. Forage. If you have pasture, good for you. Congratulations. Now, you have to evaluate the quality of that pasture, because if it's full of weeds, or it's really not that well maintained, or if it's overstocked, which happens. I'm a horse owner. I get it. I live in an area where very few people have pasture, and those that do, it is not lush because we just don't have the space. So that's okay, but know that it is probably not going to meet your horse's nutritional needs, and that's why you may need to rely on hay. So we've talked about hay quality quite a bit in this space, and that is important. So take a look at your hay. If an analysis is available to you, great. If you need to have an analysis done, there are a lot of resources available. And again, I can put a link to that in the chat as in the show notes as well. But really, basically, what is your forage source? Start there. Is it grass? Is it alfalfa? Can you get alfalfa? Do you need alfalfa to sort of boost the protein content of your horse's diet? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Next, if you are feeding a commercial concentrate, couple of things. First, are you feeding it according to the manufacturer's instructions? So a little insider tip here. When a concentrate feed is formulated, it is formulated very particularly. So if a manufacturer says to feed, say, a half a pound of a product for every 100 pounds the horse weighs, that is the amount of product needed to provide the horse with all of the nutrients on that guaranteed analysis. And ideally, that manufacturer has formulated it to meet the horse's bare minimum needs. So some people will tell me, oh yeah, my horse gets a grain. And I'll say, oh, he gets a couple handfuls of this. Well, a couple of handfuls may not be enough in this case. So step one is to look at your concentrate and see if you are feeding it according to instructions. Now, if you are feeding it according to instructions, well, perhaps it is not the right feed for your horse. Take a look at the fat content. If the fat content is low, and by low, I mean 3 to 6%, it might not be sufficient to help your horse maintain condition, and you may have to transition over to a feed that is higher in fat, somewhere in the 10 to 14% range. And pretty much every feed manufacturer has these wide varieties of feeds for you to choose from. So if you're not sure, you can always reach out to your feed company of choice and ask them for their guidance. Or, of course, you can reach out to an equine nutritionist as well. So that's step number 2. Of course, I hope it goes without saying that, again, this time of year, a lot of our horses are getting their spring shots, their spring checkups. Have a conversation with your veterinarian and make sure that there's no underlying health issues that may have developed since the last time your horse had a checkup. There's nothing strange in the blood work, etc., etc. So very important to keep your vet involved in that conversation. But I digress. So we've checked out the hay. We've checked out the concentrate. What else? Some horses may need quite a bit of concentrate to gain weight, especially if they are in active training. And that's another factor to consider. How much work is your horse doing or going to be doing? You may be ramping up for the upcoming show season, or you may be just a casual rider. But either way, take an honest assessment of the amount of work your horse is going to be doing in an average week. And if that horse is going to be doing some regular training, regular showing, they're probably somewhere in moderate work. Heavy work is really probably showing twice a week, maybe having several lessons a week, something of that nature. But most of our horses fall in that light to moderate category, depending on where you are and what you're doing. So breed is another consideration. So in general, certain breeds are easier keepers than others. I have had a thoroughbred who was a relatively easy keeper and an appendix who was not. And I don't know where this horse put all the food in front of him, but it was really difficult to keep weight on him. So it's very much individual. So warm bloods tend to be easier keepers and put on weight more easily. And sometimes when they do have a weight gain protocol, you don't necessarily need as much. But again, those are very general statements, and it really depends on each individual horse. Think about stress. If your horse is getting on the trailer a lot and you're moving around to different trail parks or different competitions, that can be a stressor. So it's thought that as a horse is on a trailer, they're expending roughly a similar amount of energy as if they were walking, right? Because they need to use energy to stand and balance on that trailer. So they are expending energy in the trailer. They're not just hanging out. So something to consider as well. So now, let's say we've checked out our forage, we've checked out our concentrate, we've checked with our vet, horse is healthy. What else? Still not enough. Some really simple things to do, or a really simple thing to do, is add a fat supplement. And there's a million options to choose from. Some people just love to top dress with a little bit of oil. And that could be vegetable oil, rice bran oil, flaxseed oil, fish oil, whatever the case may be. However, I talk to a lot of people that say, yes, I already do that. And then when I ask how much they're top dressing with, they say, oh, an ounce or two. Well, an ounce or two of oil is really great for skin and coat health, but it's not going to do much for weight gain. If we're talking straight oil here, you want to be more in the 1 cup range. Again, if we're talking about an average 1,000-pound horse here. 1 cup of oil has roughly 1,900 calories. That's a lot. Now, when I'm trying to help a horse gain weight, I'm trying to add around 6,000 calories per day to his diet. Now, as a horse owner, you're generally not counting calories, right? That's my job. And again, I'm talking about this 1,000, 1,100-pound horse. So a couple of ounces of oil is not going to do very much. You really need to be feeding more than that if you're going for weight gain. Now, some horses don't like it. And if you have to clean up a cup of oil that your horse won't eat, it's not a lot of fun. So what else do you do? There are other fat supplements out there. There are a lot of them that are commercially made, that are extruded, that are granular. So you do have options. If your horse isn't averse to powder or small particles, some of those granular ones can be really good. And again, some of the other commercial packaged fat supplements are also a really good tool in the arsenal. There's also things like my favorite, beet pulp. Soaked beet pulp can certainly help to add energy to a horse's diet. It's extremely low in carbohydrates and a good option because it is such a good digestible fiber. You probably know what I'm going to say. It's good for the hindgut. Now, I just want to go back to fat for a second. Again, fat is not going to affect an insulin response. I promised I wouldn't leave out our metabolic horses. So there are horses with endocrine conditions, metabolic disease, that need to gain weight. And the last thing you want to do with these horses is overload them with carbohydrate-heavy diets. So again, that's where your fat really comes into play here. And there are plenty of low carbohydrate concentrates out there with your metabolic horses that need to gain weight. 2 things. One is fat. The other is with these low carb concentrates, you just want to spread out the meals, even with a low carb concentrate. So you want to divide into as many meals as is reasonably possible for you to feed, whether you board or whether your horse is at home. If you can do 3 meals, great. If you can do a meal at night check, awesome. But the more you spread it out, the better it is. So I'll just leave it at that for now, because again, we're just talking in very general terms here. So these are some very basic things to think about when it comes to helping a horse gain weight. So just to recap, starting with checking your forage. Is your forage quality good? Do you have pasture? If your pasture quality is not great, see if you can get a few bales of the best quality forage available to you, whether it's grass, whether you mix in some alfalfa, whatever the case may be. And you can ask your hay producer for a hay analysis if you need that information. Next, if you're feeding a concentrate, read the label, check it out. Are you feeding it correctly? Does it have enough fat to support weight gain? If not, you might want to move to something higher in fat. Next, add a fat supplement, whether it's oil or a commercial product. And then finally, some of the forage alternatives can really be useful as well, whether that's soaked beet pulp, soaked hay cubes. They can all help add a fiber-based component to the diet to help add in some extra calories. So I hope this answers some of your questions about weight gain in horses. If you have topic ideas, something you'd like to hear about, feel free to reach out at equinenutritionphd@yahoo.com. Be happy to hear from you and always love topic suggestions. In the meantime, hope you're getting plenty of time with your horse and enjoying, at least in North America, the slowly warming temperatures. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Farm to Stable, a science-based equine nutrition podcast. Please share and subscribe if you found the content interesting. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, send it to equinenutritionphd@yahoo.com.